would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Monday edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California. Member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Today's Monday, October 24th, 2016. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend. We've got an interesting conflict in data that I thought we should cover for today. We'll get into that in just a few minutes. Of course, as always, I like to remind everyone how to get in contact with me. The best bet for you is to head on over to therebelbroker.com. From there, you can click on Contact the Rebel Broker and send along any ideas, suggestions, observations, or questions that you might have. If you'd like to join the Rebel Underground, you can simply text the word Rebel Broker to 44222. That's the word Rebel Broker, and you text it to the number 44222 to join the Rebel Underground. And finally, if you would like to be in the drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card, please also click the red button at the tippy top of the page at therebelbroker.com, titled Take the Survey to Support the Show. Use the same email address both times you're asked, and as long as those two email addresses match, you will be entered to win a $50 gift card to Amazon. We've already given away one for the month of October. We're going to give another one away in November. So jump on board for that, and you'll be in the drawing, and you might just find yourself $50 richer. And one of the things we like to do on this show is try to track data that'll give us insights into the future. And that's sort of what this data is that has sort of fallen across my desk here. And it really comes down to trying to decide where the reliable data is in terms of determining these kinds of things. And what are we sort of approaching this from? One of the good things to know is who's making up the majority of the buying population. Where is the activity coming from? Because for remodelers, that can have an impact on what type of work you're going to do to your remodel. For buyers, it can determine who's my main competition. Are there segments of the homes for sale that might not appeal to the largest chunk of buyers that I can leverage off of? And that's a good thing not only for an investor to know, but for a buyer to know. And then as a seller, how can I market my home in a way that's going to draw the largest number of potential buyers, which means you need to tap in to that biggest pool of folks out there currently shopping. So that's where we find ourselves, and we kind of have an interesting contradiction here. And I'm not really sure who I'm going to believe more. Now, I've got two links that I'll include in the show notes for today's show. One is to the Zillow Group report, and the other is to the article that sort of is giving a little bit of a summary of some of this data that I think is interesting. But it's a pretty interesting discrepancy, and I thought it would be interesting to talk about it here, and then maybe even get into some of the nitty-gritty of figuring it out for your area, because it's another one of those things that's valuable to know as long as you're mixing it in with everything else that you know is going on in your marketplace. It was a report released last week by Zillow, and it said that almost half the homes sold this year were bought by first-time buyers. And that's way higher than all the other estimates. I know there have been others made by, I think, Bloomberg. We had an article that we talked about a while back about first-time buyers. Where are they? We had something from the Association of Realtors, which they reference here. And that's an interesting thing to keep in mind, because we've talked about all these strategies to try to focus on getting the bang for your buck, as it were, and making sure not to alienate large chunks of who the biggest buyers are. And if these numbers are correct, that shifts the scale. Now, of course, when it comes to a marketing perspective, it's not an all or nothing deal, right? If you find that you've got a fairly segmented market where there's relatively equal representation, say it's 33% of this group, 33% of this group, 33% of this group, aiming your marketing at all three of those groups not only makes sense, but even if it's not that balanced, even if it's a relatively small number, it may still be worth it if you want to get maximum exposure. It simply may be that you weight your marketing differently. And I'm hoping, because this does not this is another honesty moment in real estate. This kind of specific marketing doesn't really happen in the real estate world. It goes all the way from the extreme worst end for you all out there, which really, I guess to define the absolute worst would be the pocket listing. That's the listing where you don't put it on the multiple listing service. And I am still in search. I guess there are circumstances. If I had a client insist on not having on the MLS, I could see that. There are some folks that are just so anti-publicity about what's going on with their house that they don't want it on the multiple listing service. Now, and it also may apply to super high-end properties where it might not go onto the MLS. But let me just say this. Any real estate agent that's encouraging you not to put it on the MLS is not giving you your highest probability of success. Now, I realize this only sort of loosely dovetails in with what we're talking about today, but I find it happening more and more as people think they're getting a great deal. I came across someone who recently sold their home, and it took them way longer than it should have. This was something I heard about from a friend, a former client, who was talking about a relative in another area that I don't serve, and kind of laid out what happened, and they gave me a chance to review what their situation was. And this person had been convinced that they would save a ton of money if they associated themselves with this broker who offered them, I think it was a 3.5% commission or something like that, if it was not listed on the MLS, if it was a pocket listing. Now, the reason that agencies do a pocket listing in terms of overall tactics is because it's better to get some money than no money. But in addition, if they're able to keep it all in-house, in other words, you may have two different real estate agents you're physically working with. In other words, the buyer may have an agent and the seller may have a different physical agent. But if they both work for the same brokerage, brokerages like that. There's other reasons why and that's the acceptable kind of double ending, because that's really a double ending gig, right? Double ending is when the same broker handles both. And there's legal distinctions, but that's the legal definition. I think from the standpoint of defending your interests or watching out for your interests the best, a dual agency situation is not necessarily bad as long as the physical agent who is interacting with the buyer is a different person than the person interacting with the seller. I just don't think that you can sort of have that middle ground. Now, that's a whole other topic. We've talked about dual agency before, and we've talked about instances where it is appropriate and makes sense. I've done it a few times, but it's super rare. But what I'm talking about here is trying to create an artificial dual agency by having it not be on the MLS. So the reason why you wouldn't put it on the MLS is you don't want other agents to know about it. You want the agents in your office to sell it. So the goal here is to use your resources to find a buyer that will only come through your agency, through your brokerage firm. By definition, this limits the number of eyeballs that are going to get to see your home. And that's a bad thing. So that's the bad end, right? And boy, did I go into the weeds there. We got into a whole other subject. So that's the worst case scenario end. And then one step up from that would be the agent that lists it on the MLS and does nothing else and just hopes for market momentum to carry it, figures someone will show up eventually, doesn't do any other marketing or any of that type of stuff. And then it all the way goes up to the other end. Well, you'll get the agent who blows off the doors on all the levels of advertising. We're talking, there's going to be physical, there may be physical advertising involved in that. There may be the stuff that's out in front of your house. There's the flyers to generate interest there. There's an internet presence of, all the various places where you show up look really good. And by the way, don't let the agents who say they'll create a site specifically for your home sway you. That no longer really has the impact that it used to have about 10 years ago, because that's just not how folks are finding this stuff. What you want is someone who's really going in there and leveraging off of all the internet things like Zillow, Redfin, Trulia, all that stuff, and getting you the highest visibility possible on Realtor.com, those types of things. And then, of course, there's their own specific stuff, the things we've talked about here on this show before, where you figure out what the big draws of your property are, and you find ways to market specifically to people who would be most interested in those things. An example I've used in the past was folks who are interested in horses. So you find out why it would be awesome why this property is unique from perhaps other communities. Perhaps it's a cost issue. Perhaps folks who live to the north are paying $2,000, $3,000 a month to board their horses. Well, if they were to move down here, they could board them on their own property and save all those costs. Maybe there's an airport nearby. Who knows? Whatever it is, hiking trails, those types of things, the things that you figure out would appeal to a certain group, and then marketing directly to those folks. So those are the spectrums, and you can, obviously that's cherry picking, but in a scenario like this, the next thing is figuring out the mentality of the folks who are doing the most buying. So when numbers like this come out, and I realize we haven't talked about these numbers yet, you still don't know what I'm talking about, it kind of throws a little bit of a wrench into that and makes you want to perhaps broaden, or at least encourage your agent to, or you as an agent to broaden what you're doing. So now, Zillow survey found that homeownership is increasingly the domain of college educated. 62% of buyers this year have at least 4-year college degrees, even though only 33% of the U.S. adults have graduated from college. Let's see. The first annual Zillow Group report on consumer housing trends concluded that 47% of buyers are first-time buyers, compared with 32% estimated by the National Association of Realtors. So I've looked at their report, and it sounds pretty convincing, but the National Association of Realtors really does have a little bit more of a finger on the pulse of this one, simply because they get their data from us. The vast majority of transactions that occur have a real estate agent involved, and that's just kind of the way it works. I mean, we are usually, Zillow is making their conclusions off of data they get from us. As I said, I'm going to link to this particular report so you can jump in and take a look at it and see what you think for yourself. But I think it's a very interesting observation to make. In this whole, we've talked before about beginning level housing or new home buyer housing, that type of stuff, and how it really hasn't been happening out here in California. Well, there's a company out in Texas that has kind of jumped on this bandwagon. Now, I think it's worth giving guys like this a shout out, because I think this news is actually good news for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of reasons why I want to bring this up. Of course, the initial reasons of being able to anticipate what's going on in the marketplace, but huge first-time buyer numbers, seeing a boost in that is got to be something to encourage the folks who are building to build more entry-level homes. Now, I want to give a shout-out to the folks at LGI Homes. They're predicting 24% growth in their new developments, and they are aggressively marketing starter homes. And that's something else we want to talk about, because there's also numbers that indicate that, for whatever reason, whether you believe the Zillow numbers or what the truth on the ground is, because I'll tell you, a lot of this is still not reflected in my local data. So for a lot of this, I have to look at other marketplaces to see what's making sense. LGI Homes is based in the Houston area, deals almost exclusively in low-price entry-level homes, often in far-flung suburbs and exurbs. One of its new developments in Ho, Texas. That can't be Ho. It's got to be How. Texas, for example, is 56 miles north of downtown Dallas. LGI Homes is forecasting 24% growth in new developments, the fastest rate in the publicly traded U.S. home building industry, and triple the weighted average of all public builders, according to data from John Burns Real Estate Consulting in Irvine. Now, what's interesting about that also is, keep in mind, the amount of new construction at entry level, new construction period for single-family residentials, has been dismal, worst that we've seen in decades. So this is hopefully going to try to backfill some of that gap. LGI's extensive marketing operations is their key. The company sends out 400,000 targeted flyers each week to apartment complexes and other rental units within a 25-mile radius of its new home developments. That is super interesting as well. Depending on where your rental property is, you could actually find this starting to play into a reduction in rents in your areas where these guys are building. One thing that's also interesting here is I think that this is a trend that we can anticipate having occur more frequently in other areas. we are going to start to see some of these apartment because remember, what we've been building over the last few years is apartment complexes. I mentioned earlier we had a 75% increase just in Silicon Valley in 1 year in terms of the number of housing units, and the vast majority of them were apartments. So by having the market respond in this way, at least one market, granted this isn't the whole country, but to have one builder respond in this way indicates they're seeing a higher potential for a lot of activity among first-time buyers. So that's kind of encouraging. Another thing that I think is worth pointing out is that we've seen housing starts, single-family residential homes have actually surged in September. Sometimes the headline will be multifamily units go down, but that's actually not bad. I think we've actually, at least in my area, the feeling I get is that we've overbuilt in a lot of these apartment complex developments. But what we're seeing is a pretty good increase in the number of U.S. single-family starts, at least recently, as a more general trend. Quote, and this is from CNBC, groundbreaking on single-family housing projects, which accounts for the largest share of the residential housing market, jumped 8.1% to 783,000 units paced last month, the Commerce Department said on Wednesday. That's the highest level since February. Still a relatively low number considering what we've developed over in past decades, but at least that's an encouraging number. I like to see the starts start to catch up with what is potentially the demand. Still very low, still not sexy in terms of really pushing the market forward. But if we get more builders answering the cry like we're seeing from LGI in Houston, I think that's potentially a very good trend. All right, so single-family starts surge ahead of estimates. This was another thing that came to us from Rice Media. Of course, all of these articles that I'm referencing now will be included in the show notes for today's show if you'd like to check them out. Hence, the Census Bureau and Department of Housing and Urban Development reports single-family starts in September, which was an 8.1% increase, which we already mentioned. Privately owned starts tumbled 9%. Let's see. Single-family housing completions in addition fell 8.1, so that's a month-to-month thing, so that's not horrible. The headline number in this month's report doesn't tell the full story, says Bill Bainfield, Vice President of Quicken Loans. The decline in privately owned starts. Single-family starts made significant gains in September, which is welcome news to a housing market that has continued to lack inventory, especially in entry-level sectors. So this is good. This is good news for the market in general. But in addition to knowing the customer that you're potentially going to serve, whether you are a landlord or you're a remodeler, a flipper, or who your competition is if you are a buyer, and again, who your customer might be if you're a seller, it's important to understand this dynamic and how it might affect your ability to get the price you want if you're a seller or to pay the price you want if you're a buyer. It gives additional levels of competition to certain areas, so it's going to be good to find out if this trend, if this philosophy is starting to take root in your area, because it's going to represent a higher level of competition. You know, a really good example of not being aware of what's going on with your competition was a property that I took a look at over this last weekend. I went out and viewed 3 homes in my area, and I had pretty high hopes. I had started to see things decline a little bit. 2 of these properties had been on the market for a ridiculous amount of time, but they were both priced snuggling right up next to $700,000. 2 of them. The third one was far less, and once I saw it, I understood why. But the first one I looked at, it blew my mind that this person expected to be able to sell this home for what was basically $699,000. And it was one of those deals where once you bought it, in order to bring it up to where you'd feel good about living in it, you'd need to spend about $80,000 to upgrade. The kitchen was completely a done deal. It had very weird flooring going on. It had the absolute cheapest that you can, and it's another good example of owners who try to sell a property and try to do it cheaply and end up making things worse. This was a property that had clearly had the absolute Home Depot special in terms of laminate flooring, and they had installed it. What was very bizarre was some parts of the home had a completely different laminate flooring to this, what was clearly the newer installation of laminate flooring. So there was no attempt to made to make it feel consistent. It was bad money spent. No matter what that floor looked like before, going with the way they went was a really bad call. So that was number one. Whoever went in there really didn't think about the presentation of the home and what it was going to look like after they'd spent their hard-earned money on this extremely cheap laminate floor. The other problem was it was ridiculously priced. It was priced as if someone was thinking the market the way it was 6 months ago. And it's not. This home's going to stay on the market. This home will be lucky to sell for $50,000 less than what it's currently listed for. And I reached out to the agent, and those folks are semi-reticent. So this is another instance where, in terms of not being willing to move from their price. This is another good example of why I like to track the trend of how much above the appraisal price sellers are estimating their home value to be or below. So I'm actually preparing to write an offer on one of these, but it's going to be ridiculously below what they're asking. I'm actually starting to home in on the price I'm going to offer, and they're not going to be happy. It's going to be about $90,000 less than what they're marketing it for, but why am I willing to do that? Because their home has been on the market twice as long as it should have been, given the average days on market in my marketplace. I have tons of data that I can include with my offer. I'm going to write a cover letter so that I can make sure and explain what I'm seeing. I don't want them to get I don't want a emotional response, which was what's going to happen initially, but I want to make sure that my numbers aren't to screw them. My numbers are simply based on what I'm seeing in terms of the reality of the marketplace. So, and that's the same kind of strategies I want you folks to use when you're out there putting your offers in. Next on my list here today, first-time buyers drive increase in existing home sales. So we've got other folks that are sort of pushing the same thing, but they're pushing the National Association of Realtors numbers. And once you look at the Zillow versus the National Association of Realtors numbers, even if you want to have an argument about who's right or who's closer to the right number, the reality is both of them show an increase. So you can argue about the margins of the difference between these two reports, but the reality is that if you are a buyer, whether you're a first-time buyer or not, there's a higher percentage of buyers coming out that are now first-time buyers. And you as a seller or a landlord who may be wondering if you're going to lose your tenants, need to be aware of the fact that first-time buying is definitely starting to make a bit of a comeback in terms of percentage of buyers out there. Now, because it sounds great to say 50% of new buyers or homes sold were new buyers, but you have to remember that in a lot of these areas also the volume is down. So those first-time buyers, who has the highest motivation to buy? Often first-time buyers in a horrible rental situation, or they're living in mom and dad's basement, or it's just a scenario where they need to get out on their own, and eventually rents are crazy enough that buying looks more sane. And we've covered that as well, where we've talked about the ratio between buying and selling. We're going to go ahead and talk about this just a little bit more, but we're going to take a quick break here. So don't go away. We'll be back in just a second. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right. Aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. We've been sort of doing a general survey of just numbers out there. Really, what we started off discussing was the increase in the number of first-time buyers that are sort of hitting the marketplace. And it's going to be interesting to find out some of the reasoning behind what has boosted it. And one of my thoughts is the overall number of buyers is actually down. And I can't help wondering if... And of course, the ratio is the ratio, right? So even if it is a lower number from the standpoint of the folks who are out there shopping, for you out there trying to attract the people that are actively buying, the advice remains the same. But if we're trying to look at the marketplace from the standpoint of just overall performance, what are the numbers doing? It's actually not that amazing. Now, to answer that question, I went ahead and took a look at some of the news items out there and took a look at one that came out from Realtor.org. Existing home sales rebounded strongly in September and were propelled by sales from first-time buyers reaching a 34% share, which is a high not seen in over 4 years, according to the National Association of Realtors. All major regions saw increases in closings last month, and distressed sales fell to a new low of 4%. Total existing home sales, which are completed transactions that include single-family homes, townhomes, condominiums, and co-ops, hiked 3.2% to a seasonally adjusted annual rate of 5.47 million in September, from a downwardly revised 5.3 million in August. Let's see. The median existing, okay, that's not sexy data. The 2-month slump in existing sales reversed course convincingly in September. So that's actually pretty good in terms of... Yeah, and it's a seasonally adjusted number. So that's actually good. So the long and the short of it is in some regions what you're probably going to see is lower number of sales. I know that that's a problem that we've had in several markets here in the Silicon Valley area. As a broader concern, you're going to want to find out for yourself. And that's really just to calibrate you to how much buying public there is out there. But the reality still remains, the folks that you want to cater to are tending more and more to be first-time buyers. And if you're someone is in a position where your market maybe isn't as dramatic as it is in others, meaning that right now sellers aren't as much in the catbird seat, maybe it's more of a balanced marketplace. Maybe you are in a position where you want to move faster. You're going to want to try to come up with some scenarios or some tactics that are going to attract those new home sellers better than your neighbors who are trying to get their home sold. Now, what are things that can work with new home buyers? Well, one way is to carry back a note yourself. That's not a great thing to do. In a market like this, I wouldn't suggest any of my sellers do it unless we were in a very competitive situation. But in terms of providing things that allow seller or buyers to feel a little bit more comfortable, perhaps even work out a financial situation, it's not something I'd offer right up front, but it's something you could potentially offer up to first-time buyers. Sometimes offering some sort of a move-in incentive, like you'll pay for the rental truck. If you can get into it and get into a conversation with your buyers, you can find out what are some of their major concerns. And you're going to want to address those if you're in a more competitive marketplace. On the flip side of that, just making your home more attractive to that first-time buyer. And what is a first-time buyer typically looking for? Well, the good news is your first-time buyers, while they do tend to continue to be the 3-bedroom folks, I find that my first-time buyers are often more willing to entertain 2-bedroom homes. So when you start to see increases in the number of folks out there that are first-time buyers, and if you own properties that are 2-bedroom homes that you've been considering selling, I find that I get a better number, a better sales price for those 2-bedroom properties when I'm selling them when first-time buyers are happening more frequently. Typically, what you're going to get is you're going to get a first-time buyer who's with just 2 folks, and they're looking for a bedroom for themselves and potentially a bedroom for a child that might be planned, or they may be pregnant, or they might be looking for a second bedroom, really as more of an office or hobby space for them. And by and large, that's who I sell 2 bedrooms to. It tends to be folks in one of those 2 categories. So in addition to focusing on the things that your home physically offers that satisfies that need, if you're going to be focusing on those 2 high potential things, you're going to want to emphasize easy commutes. You're going to want to emphasize access to parks, that type of stuff. You're also going to be typically with 2 bedrooms looking at folks who have a correlation with folks who are interested in more nearby things that might include bike trails, hiking trails, those types of things. So keep that all in mind as this tendency of new home buyers to be the dominant force grows, because remember, it was the opposite. Remember, we were talking about these numbers earlier this year. Where were we? I think it must have been February or March, when we were talking about the folks we needed to be catering to tended to be the older folks. It tended to be the folks who were more established, where 3 bedrooms was more likely to be their thing. So this is kind of an interesting shift and shows an opportunity for folks who either have a 2-bedroom property or are potentially interested in flipping a 2-bedroom property, and in a way that under the circumstances we've talked about before, where a great way to handle a 2-bedroom flip is to add a 3rd bedroom to it, that may not be necessary. You may find yourself in a position where you'll get more bang for the buck. You'll get a stronger return on your investment by leaving that property a 2-bedroom. But it's going to depend on what the ground truth is in your area. And if you are in an area where this first-time buyer phenomenon is going on, that may play into it for you. Now, other numbers that I'm going to want to see, that I'm interested in as a guy who watches real estate, what effect does this actually have on the percentage distribution of homes that are being purchased? Does it show an increase in 2 bedrooms? Because remember, one of the other statistics that we were listening to very early this year was that the millennials, the folks who were going to be those first-time buyers, were oftentimes not buying the way previous generations have, where they figure, I'll buy something that'll work for now, and then in a decade or 5 years, I'll buy the thing that does make sense. Most of them were trying to purchase the home that would be the long-term investment. So those folks were going for that 3+ bedroom home, thinking, I don't need 3 bedrooms now, but in a few years I might, and I'd rather pay today's price than the price that would be coming down in 10 years. And so these were decisions that were being made more in terms of folks thinking, I'm going to buy this house and that's it. I'm done. I'm buying this one house and I'm not going to jump into this mix again. So it's going to be interesting to see if that trend from the past is continuing to translate into what folks are doing. To be really honest, that was an interesting trend, and I thought it was something that could potentially slow down the market as folks wanted to save longer to purchase that bigger home. But I think that there may be some concern on the part of these folks where I can't wait that long. I want to get that property. And just from a cost standpoint, they may finally just settle back into what we've seen historically be quote unquote normal and jump into those 2-bedroom homes. So I'm kind of looking forward to those numbers. And as soon as I get them, I'll be happy to share them with you here. All right, folks, absolutely appreciate you spending your valuable time with me, at least a little bit each day. I hope that I'm able to provide you with at least as much value for discussion purposes or seeing a little bit more about what's going on in real estate, and hopefully even giving you some great advice on how to move forward with your real estate goals. Once again, thanks for listening, everybody. I'll talk to y'all next time.